There are seasons in the spiritual life when God feels close, prayer feels warm, faith feels alive, hope feels natural. And then, there are seasons when God feels far, silent, hidden, unresponsive. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux knew these seasons deeply, not as theory, but as lived experience. She discovered that one of the greatest prices of fidelity is remaining when God no longer feels near. Many souls are faithful when God is felt. Few remain faithful when God is hidden. This is where most walk away, not always from belief, but from intimacy. They continue routines, they continue habits, but the heart slowly disengages because distance feels like rejection. The soul says, if God loved me, I would feel him. If God was near, prayer would be easier. If God cared, this silence would not last. Saint Thérèse would gently correct this. She would say, God's silence is not absence. It is often invitation. Invitation to love without feeling. Invitation to trust without proof. Invitation to remain without reward. This is the price, because remaining without feeling costs more than remaining with consolation. When God feels close, faith is supported. When God feels distant, faith is chosen. Chosen faith is costly, because the heart receives no emotional payment, no reassurance, no sweetness, no sense of being carried, only naked trust. This is where fidelity becomes pure, not because it feels noble, but because it feels empty. Saint Thérèse discovered that God often hides his sensible presence to purify love, so that love is no longer sustained by what is felt, but by who is trusted. This is painful, because the soul naturally associates love with feeling. When feeling disappears, the soul assumes love has disappeared. Saint Thérèse would say, this is illusion. Love can be present even when it is not felt. In fact, love is often deepest when it is not felt, because it is no longer mixed with self-seeking. The soul can no longer say, I stay because this feels good. It must say, I stay because he is God. This is the price. Staying when prayer is dry, staying when silence is long, staying when the heart is tired, staying when hope feels thin. This kind of staying is invisible. No one praises it, no one sees it, no one applauds it. Only God sees it. And Saint Thérèse would say, God treasures it, because it is love stripped of reward. It is faith without sight. It is trust without evidence. It is perseverance without comfort. This is not weakness. It is strength of the deepest kind, not emotional strength, but spiritual strength, the strength to remain when nothing in you wants to. This is why most walk away, not because they reject God, but because they cannot bear loving without feeling loved. Saint Thérèse would say, remaining in these seasons is one of the greatest acts of love, because it says, I love you for who you are, not for what I feel. This is the beginning of mature faith, not faith supported by experience, but faith supported by surrender. This is where the soul begins to love like Christ. Christ on the cross did not feel the Father's closeness, and yet he remained. My God, why have you forsaken me? And still he trusted. Saint Thérèse saw her darkness in that cry, and she learned, faithfulness in distance unites the soul to the deepest mystery of Christ. This is the price, and this is why it is so precious. Many souls believe that if God is with them, there will be signs, feelings of peace, moments of clarity, small consolations, inner confirmations. Saint Thérèse learned to live without these, not because God never gave them, but because he did not always continue them. She discovered that one of the prices of fidelity is learning to walk without visible reassurance. The soul wants proof. Proof that prayer matters. Proof that God hears. Proof that effort is not wasted. When proof disappears, the soul feels abandoned. Saint Thérèse would say, this is the moment of pure faith, because faith is no longer supported by experience. It is supported by choice. The soul chooses to believe God's heart, even when it cannot feel God's hand. This is painful, because the human heart is wired for feedback. We want response. We want confirmation. We want some sense that what we are doing matters. God sometimes removes this not to discourage, but to deepen, so that the soul learns to love God for God, not for spiritual results. This is a hidden martyrdom. not of blood, but of feeling. The soul is faithful, while feeling nothing. Saint Thérèse would say this is one of the most misunderstood forms of holiness. Because from the outside, nothing looks heroic. From the inside, everything feels heavy. The soul is carrying faith without emotional help. This is costly, because it feels like walking in the dark. The soul says, I do not see you, I do not hear you, I do not feel you, and yet it continues. This continuing is the sacrifice, not dramatic, but constant. Saint Thérèse learned that God often hides his sensible presence to protect the soul from loving only the gifts. He wants the soul to love the giver. This is hard. Because gifts are easier to love, they are tangible, they are comforting, they are reassuring. God himself is invisible, and loving what is invisible requires deep faith. This is why most hesitate. Because invisible love feels unsafe. The soul prefers what it can feel. Saint Thérèse would say, God is training the soul to love beyond feeling, to trust beyond sight, to remain beyond comfort. This is not loss, it is growth. But growth that feels like loss, because the soul loses what it depended on: spiritual sweetness, emotional reassurance, sense of closeness. In losing these, the soul feels stripped. This stripping is not cruelty, it is preparation for a deeper union. Union that is not shaken by emotion, union that is not dependent on mood, union that is not controlled by circumstance. This is where fidelity becomes stable, not because life is stable, but because trust is stable. Saint Thérèse would say, if you remain faithful without signs, your faith becomes strong in silence, and strong in silence is stronger than strong in feeling. Because silence cannot be taken away, feelings can. This is the price: walking without signs, trusting without proof, remaining without reassurance. And this is why heaven sees what the world never sees: a soul loving God in the dark. One of the hardest prices of fidelity is remaining when the soul feels empty. Not sad in a dramatic way, not angry, just empty. Prayer feels mechanical, words feel flat, hope feels thin, desire feels weak. Saint Thérèse knew this interior desert, not as a passing moment, but as a prolonged experience. She discovered that this emptiness is not proof of failure. It is often proof of purification. God is removing supports, not to abandon, but to teach the soul to walk without leaning on feeling. This is exhausting. Because emptiness offers no emotional fuel, the soul continues out of decision, not out of desire. This is costly, because it requires choosing God without inner reward. Saint Thérèse would say this is where love becomes most real, not when love is easy, but when love is chosen in weakness. The soul says, I am tired, but I remain. I feel nothing, but I remain. I do not understand, but I remain. This remaining is not stubbornness, it is surrender. Surrender that does not feel strong, surrender that feels fragile, but fragile surrender is still surrender. God does not measure strength the way humans do. He measures fidelity. Fidelity when there is no emotional reason to be faithful. This is where many stop praying, not because they stop believing, but because prayer feels pointless. Saint Thérèse would say this is illusion. Prayer is never pointless, even when it feels empty, especially when it feels empty, because empty prayer is prayer stripped of self, no longer fueled by comfort, no longer supported by feeling. It becomes pure offering, pure staying, pure yes. This is costly, because the soul wants to feel something, anything. Silence feels like rejection, but Saint Thérèse would say, silence is not rejection. It is invitation to deeper faith, invitation to remain without feedback, invitation to love without emotional return. This is where fidelity becomes interior martyrdom, not seen, not praised, not understood, only God knows. And Saint Thérèse believed that God treasures this, because it looks like his Son on the cross, still loving, still trusting, still offering, even when feeling abandoned. The soul in emptiness is sharing that mystery, not emotionally, but spiritually. This is why emptiness is not wasted. It is shared suffering, shared trust, shared surrender. This is the price. continuing when nothing in you wants to continue, and yet continuing. This is not weakness, it is hidden strength, not the strength to conquer, but the strength to remain. One of the greatest prices of fidelity is learning to love God when love no longer feels supported, when affection disappears, when warmth fades, when prayer feels cold, when the heart feels alone. Saint Thérèse learned that this is where love becomes naked, not dressed in feeling, not carried by sweetness, not sustained by emotion, just love, chosen love. This is terrifying to the natural heart, because the natural heart wants love to feel alive. When feeling dies, the heart assumes love has died. Saint Thérèse would say this is not true. Feeling is not love. Feeling accompanies love, but it is not love. Love is the decision to remain given, to remain offered, to remain faithful, even when nothing inside confirms that choice. This is one of the most painful purifications, because the soul loses emotional support. It must now stand on faith alone, faith that says, even if I do not feel you, you are here. Even if my heart is cold, your heart is not. Even if I feel alone, I am not abandoned. This kind of love feels weak, but in heaven it is strong, because it is not mixed with self-seeking. It is not sustained by pleasure. It is sustained by truth. Saint Thérèse would say that this love is closer to the love of Jesus in Gethsemane. He loved when he felt overwhelmed. He loved when his soul was in agony. He loved when comfort was removed. And yet, he remained faithful. This is where the soul becomes like Christ, not in feeling, but in fidelity. This is why most walk away, not because they stop believing, but because they stop loving when love no longer feels supported. Saint Thérèse would say, remaining in this stage is one of the purest acts of love, because it says, I love you for who you are, not for how you make me feel. This is costly, because the soul must let go of emotional reward. But it is also freeing, because love is no longer controlled by feeling. It becomes stable, rooted, unshakable. Saint Thérèse discovered a secret. God often forms the deepest union with the soul in seasons of distance, not because he is Father, but because he is closer in a hidden way. When God is felt, the soul is aware of God. When God is not felt, the soul is united to God by faith. This union is quieter, less dramatic, but deeper, because it does not depend on sensation, it depends on surrender. Saint Thérèse would say that in darkness the soul and God are joined in the same act of trust. God trusts the soul to remain. The soul trusts God to remain. This mutual trust is intimacy, not felt, but real. The soul often thinks intimacy must be experienced. Saint Thérèse learned that the deepest intimacy is often endured in silence, endured in waiting, endured in faith. This is not punishment, it is formation of a soul that will not leave, not because it feels good, but because it belongs. This is the difference between spiritual relationship and spiritual maturity. Relationship is built on experience. Maturity is built on commitment. Saint Thérèse would say, God is forming a soul that will not walk away when feeling disappears, because that soul loves God himself, not God's presence. This is hidden holiness. No one sees it, no one praises it, no one understands it, but heaven recognizes it, because heaven sees a soul loving God in pure faith. This is rare, this is why it is costly, but it is also why it is precious. In the end, Saint Thérèse would not leave the soul in darkness. She would speak hope. Remaining faithful when God feels distant is not wasted. Not one moment, not one prayer, not one silent act of trust. Every act of remaining writes something eternal in the soul. It writes capacity for deeper love, capacity for deeper trust, capacity for deeper union. The soul becomes stronger in faith, even if it feels weaker in emotion. This is real growth, even if it feels like loss. Saint Thérèse would say, the soul that remains in darkness for love will recognize God more clearly in light, not because it earned light, but because it learned to love without it. This creates a love that nothing can destroy, not distance, not dryness, not suffering, not silence. This is why the price is worth paying, because it forms a soul that belongs to God, not only when God is felt, but when God is trusted. This is mature love. This is adult faith. This is love that mirrors Christ. And this is why heaven treasures souls who remain, not because they are strong, but because they love in weakness. Saint Thérèse would say, "If God feels distant, do not leave. Do not measure love by feeling. Remain, because remaining is love, and love that remains in darkness shines brightest in heaven."